Coming up on Arirang News. On day 2 of the Fukushima wastewater discharge, Japan collects samples from the nearby coast to check radiation levels in the seawater and confirms they're within the normal range. South Korea's defense chief denounces the North for its second attempt to put a spy satellite into orbit, calling it a clear provocation. In response, the UN Security Council is set to convene a session. Donald Trump has been arrested at the Fulton County Jail on charges connected to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. On his 4th indictment this year, he becomes the first former president to have a mugshot taken. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin with the latest on the release of Fukushima wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. A day after Japan began discharging contaminated water, its Environment Ministry and Tokyo Electric Power Company, in charge of the crippled nuclear power plant, collected samples from the nearby coast to check radiation levels in the seawater. Early signs show that the concentration levels of tritium are within the normal range. Our Shin Ha-young has the details.
Following Thursday's discharge of Fukushima wastewater, Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, has begun gathering seawater samples from 10 locations within a distance of 3 kilometers of the power plant. The procedure aims to determine how many radioactive materials have spread into the ocean and what the impact will be. This is done by measuring tritium concentration. It'll do so for around a month on a daily basis, releasing the data the following day. For the 3-kilometer sampling point, the concentration of the water should be less than 700 becquerels per liter. If the samples exceed the level, the discharge will be halted. TEPCO announced the first test results on Friday, saying that the concentration levels were within the standards. In addition, data released by the International Atomic Energy Agency shows that at 6 p.m. on both Thursday and Friday, tritium concentration levels were found to be at 206 becquerels per liter, also within the normal range set by the World Health Organization. Separate from TEPCO, Japan's Environment Ministry on Friday also began collecting seawater samples, but from 11 different locations with a radius of 50 kilometers around the power plant. That's according to Japanese news outlet Kyodo News, which reports that the first results of the investigation will be announced on Sunday. The ministry will then continue to publish sample results throughout the next 3 months. Meanwhile, during a press conference on Thursday, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida addressed certain issues and vowed to protect Japan's fisheries industry.
The Japanese government will take all possible measures, including utilizing funds and compensation from Tokyo Electric Power Company, so that fisheries businesses will not suffer from the release of ALPS-treated water into the ocean, including reputational damage.
Regarding China's ban on importing Japanese seafood, Kishida urged China to immediately lift the restriction and to have experts engage in a scientific debate on the effects of the wastewater release. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
South Korea is among many countries that are keeping close tabs on the Fukushima water release. The government says the discharge process is going as planned so far, and experts will be sent to Fukushima as early as this weekend. And to address public concerns, it'll expand the number of radioactivity tests on farmed seafood. Our Bae Eun-ji reports.
The South Korean government confirmed Friday that the wastewater from the nuclear power plant in Fukushima is being released as originally planned. In a daily press briefing, the government said it's monitoring the situation by receiving real-time data from the Tokyo Electric Power Company, as well as via hotlines established between the two countries' regulatory and diplomatic authorities.
So far, the discharge process that began yesterday at 1 p.m. is proceeding stably as originally planned, without any sort of abnormalities.
The official stressed that the government is doing its best to make sure the discharge does not affect the health and safety of people in Korea. Addressing public concerns, the government also said it will conduct more radiation tests on its farmed seafood. Starting next week, it plans to more than double the number of tests and carry out a total of around 4,000 tests by the end of this year.
In addition to the tests that are already being carried out by the government, we will significantly expand the number of tests on farmed seafood before it's shipped through private organizations.
With South Korea's close proximity to Japan, it has been conducting radiation tests on its farmed seafood since 2011, when a powerful earthquake and tsunami destroyed the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Meanwhile, the government also explained that South Korean experts will be sent to the nuclear power plant as early as this weekend. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo earlier announced that experts will be sent to the Fukushima every 2 weeks to check if Japan is following the safety standards and to make sure it doesn't go wrong. This comes amid public fear and frustration in South Korea, with civic groups launching protests despite the government's reassurances. Peunji, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, South Korea's defense chief has denounced North Korea for its second attempt to put a spy satellite into orbit, calling it a clear provocation. The Defense Ministry also says that there was an abnormality in the second stage of the rocket, contrary to what the regime had claimed earlier. Choi Min-jung has more.
South Korea's head of national defense denounced North Korea's second attempted satellite launch, stating that the regime had yet again seriously violated UN Security Council resolutions. Speaking to lawmakers at a session of the National Defense Committee at the National Assembly on Friday, Defense Minister Lee Jong-sop added that North Korea's nuclear weapons and missiles were the most serious threat to South Korea's national security.
This is a grave violation of UN Security Council resolutions and a clear provocation against peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in the international community.
The Defense Ministry assessed that the second launch was carried out to make up for its first failed attempt in May. It was also believed to be an attempt to demonstrate Pyongyang's capabilities and a response to the ongoing Seoul-Washington military exercise, as well as the new trilateral cooperation agreement among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Contrary to North Korea's claims, the ministry revealed that it spotted an abnormality in the second stage of the rocket. Pyongyang had announced that the first and second stages ignited according to plan, while the third stage failed due to an error in the emergency blasting system. The minister added that South Korea and the U.S. have been cooperating and sharing information to carry out a search for debris following the failed launch. Lee also vowed stronger trilateral security cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo.
Through the security cooperation solidified during the trilateral summit, we will lower the risk of North Korea's provocations and further strengthen our security.
In response to the regime's latest provocation, the UN Security Council is set to convene a session on Friday. The meeting is to take place at the request of 7 member countries and South Korea. Meanwhile, the North has yet to announce the failure of the launch on domestic media, with pundits saying this could be to save face. Following the second failed attempt to put a satellite in orbit on Thursday, North Korea is set for a third launch sometime in October. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Stressing that there is a now stronger relationship between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo following the Camp David summit, South Korea's ambassador to the U.S. says the 3 countries will work closely to respond to North Korean threats, meaning more sanctions. Shin Se-byuk with more.
The recent trilateral summit between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan has laid an unprecedentedly strong foundation for three-way cooperation that could foster ties under any circumstances. This is according to South Korean ambassador to the United States, Cho Hyun-dong, speaking in Washington on Thursday. Referring to the Seoul-Washington-Tokyo grouping as a small multilateral consultative body at the highest level, Cho stated that the three-way cooperation is more powerful than other multilateral bodies considered significant by Washington, such as the Quad and AUKUS. In particular, Cho emphasized that the agreements made during the summit, including the commitment to hold regular summits and ministerial-level meetings, are rare to find in other small multilateral pacts. During their summit at Camp David last Friday, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, U.S. President Joe Biden, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida agreed to enhance their trilateral cooperation through a series of measures. These include annual three-way summits, as well as meetings involving defense, foreign affairs, commerce, and treasury ministers. Meanwhile, during the same briefing, South Korea's top diplomat in the U.S. condemned Pyongyang's latest failed attempt to launch a space rocket. North Korea on Thursday went ahead with a second attempt to put a spy satellite into orbit, but it failed due to an error in the emergency blasting system. To mark the recent attempt as a quote-unquote clear violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions, regardless of the outcome. He also called for preparedness to respond to any further provocations from Pyongyang. And following the failed launch, the South Korean ambassador also said South Korea, the U.S., and Japan would collaborate closely to develop a systematic response to North Korean threats, including imposing additional sanctions against the regime. 신세벽, 아리랑 뉴스.
South Korea and U.S. Naval Special Commandos on Friday held joint drills at an American military base, Camp Humphreys in Pyeongtaek, as part of their ongoing annual Ulji Freedom Shield exercise. The South Korean Navy says the drills included special reconnaissance operations, casualty treatment, and responses to other types of emergency situations. Special warfare officers from the two countries will continue to carry out a number of training sessions through next month, such as infiltration tactics on sea and land and strike operations. A North Korean commercial flight landed in the Russian city of Vladivostok on Friday for the first time since the outbreak of COVID-19 more than 3.5 years ago. Air Koryo flight JS272 arrived at Vladivostok International Airport at around 11:14 a.m. local time and then returned at some point in the afternoon. According to local officials in Vladivostok, the aircraft departed Pyongyang Sunan International Airport without any passengers on board. It's also unclear whether anyone was on board for the return leg. Russian news agency Interfax reports that another Air Koryo flight is set to arrive at the airport on Monday. The number of new jobs added to overall employment figures in the first 3 months of 2023 saw the slowest growth in about a year. According to Statistics Korea data made public on Friday, about 460,000 jobs were added year-on-year in the first quarter, the smallest increase since the fourth quarter of 2021. Also, this is the fourth consecutive quarter that the on-year job additions have been slowing down. By age, those in their 60s or over found around 300,000 new jobs, while people in their 20s or under saw a decrease in new jobs opportunities for the second quarter in a row, with a fall of over 60,000. South Korean firms continue to lead the global DRAM market in the second quarter of this year. According to Taiwanese market research firm TrendForce on Thursday, the revenues of global DRAM companies saw a 20% increase in the second quarter of 2023 compared to the quarter before, backed by higher demand for AI chips. Among them, SK hynix had the highest on-quarter growth in revenue of 49%, standing at $3.4 billion. In fact, SK was the only firm in the DRAM sector that saw a jump in market share from the previous quarter, retaking the number 2 spot in the global rankings from the US-based Micron. Despite seeing a drop in market share, Samsung Electronics remained top of the rankings. Hyundai Motor Group's premium brand Genesis ranked first among all brands for tech innovation, with Hyundai Motor securing second place. Conducted by J.D. Power, the 2023 Tech Experience Index study revealed on Thursday it's analyzed responses of new 2023 model vehicles. Genesis earned 656 points ahead of other premium brands such as Cadillac, Lexus, and BMW, marking its third consecutive year as the top-ranked brand. Hyundai Motor ranked second overall with 547 points, while securing the top rank among mass-market brands for the fourth consecutive year. The Genesis GV80 and Hyundai Motor's Palisade and Sonata also won TXI's Advanced Technology Award. President Yoon Suk-yeol on Friday appointed Lee Dong-kwan as the new chief of the Korea Communications Commission, the nation's main broadcast watchdog, but it did so without the National Assembly's confirmation report. During the hearing process, Lee, who served as the senior secretary for public affairs during the Lee Myung-bak administration, met strong objections from the main opposition, the Democratic Party of Korea. The DP claimed that Lee has a history of suppressing the media and also brought up his son's involvement in a school bullying case, both of which Lee denies. Lee is expected to reorganize the public broadcast system and web portals as he pledged to make the country a leading global player in the media industry while fighting fake news. Former U.S. President Donald Trump surrendered at a jail in Georgia in his fourth arrest this year. He was briefly booked on 2020 election-related charges, becoming the first former U.S. president ever to have a mugshot taken. Yoon with the details.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump has surrendered to law enforcement authorities for the fourth time this year. This time he surrendered to Fulton County Jail in Atlanta, Georgia on Thursday night, where he was charged over alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election in the state. But his visit to Atlanta was notably different from the three past surrenders. Rather than a courthouse, Trump was required to visit the county jail, which has a history of violence and poor conditions. And unlike in other cities that did not require him to pose for a mugshot, a booking photo of him was taken, a first in history for a former U.S. president. The booking process was brisk, merely 20 minutes, and Trump was released on a $200,000 bond, which had him quickly heading back to the airport for his return flight home to New Jersey. He insisted once again that he did nothing wrong and called the case accusing him of subverting election results a travesty of justice. In all, the former president was in Atlanta for roughly an hour and a half. In Fulton County, unlike in other jurisdictions, arraignments generally happen after a defendant surrenders at the jail and completes the booking process, not on the same day. That means Trump may have to make another trip to Georgia in the coming weeks. And unlike his previous arrests, his indictment in Atlanta was with 18 others, including his ex-chief of staff Mark Meadows and former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. So far, a total of 12 defendants, including Trump, have surrendered, while Trump and 10 co-defendants are now out on bail. One of the co-defendants, Harrison Floyd, who heads Black Voices for Trump, remains in custody after failing to negotiate a bond agreement. The remaining 7 co-defendants have until noon Eastern Time on Friday to turn themselves in. Yoon, Arirang News.
In Johannesburg, the BRICS bloc of developing nations invited 6 new members to join, including Saudi Arabia and Iran, in an apparent move against the West. On top of that, Chinese leader Xi Jinping vows for industrialization and agricultural modernization as he meets African leaders. Chung Eun-ju tells us more.
The BRICS group of emerging economies has announced the admission of 6 new members in an attempt to reshape the global world order and provide a counterweight to the U.S. and its allies. The decision was announced Thursday as South African President Cyril Ramaphosa wrapped up the annual summit of the group in Johannesburg. From the beginning of next year, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, Argentina, and the United Arab Emirates will join the current 5 members: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is the bloc's first expansion in 13 years. Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated the new BRICS members in a video message, adding that the bloc's global influence will continue to grow. Putin did not attend the 3-day summit in person as he faces an arrest warrant for war crimes in Ukraine issued by the International Criminal Court. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also welcomed the expansion. Chinese leader Xi Jinping described the expansion as historic. He added the bloc should accelerate the BRICS expansion process to bring more countries into the BRICS family. Xi had been the leading proponent of the admission of new members, presenting an enlarged BRICS as a way for the Global South to have a stronger voice in world affairs. President Xi Jinping said during the China-Africa dialogue, which followed the BRICS summit that concluded earlier on Thursday, that China will also provide emergency food assistance to some African nations. Beijing will help countries in Africa to expand grain cultivation and encourage Chinese companies to invest in agriculture. Food inflation has surged in Africa since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The conflict has also caused fuel and fertilizer costs to increase, which contributed to double-digit increases in food costs from Nigeria to Ethiopia. 정은주, Arirang News.
Just after 24 hours after Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin's reported death in a plane crash, Russian President Vladimir Putin broke his silence on the man who he described as having a complicated fate. Meanwhile, the U.S. is raising speculations on the possible causes of the accident, including a bomb. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke on Wagner Group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin for the first time since the deadly plane accident that presumably killed the mercenary group's leader. On Thursday, Putin sent his condolences to the family of Prigozhin and recalled him being a man with a complicated fate.
As for the aviation tragedy, first of all, I want to express my sincerest condolences to the family of all the victims. I knew Prigozhin for a very long time, since the early 1990s. He was a man with a complicated fate, and he made serious mistakes in life.
Putin, however, praised Prigozhin for being a talented businessman that not only worked in Russia, but also in Africa. Meanwhile, Washington has raised a number of possibilities on what caused the plane accident. While Pentagon spokesperson Pat Ryder said the U.S.'s initial assessment is that Prigozhin was killed, there's no proof that a surface-to-surface missile took down the plane, as some of the reports have indicated. However, U.S. intelligence officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity said the explosion could have been caused by a bomb or other device planted on the aircraft. The big question now is, what will the future hold for the Wagner Group? According to experts, the group's leadership structure is kept tightly under wraps, so it's unclear who will take over as the new leader, while some say it could be chosen by the Kremlin. They add that the Wagner Group could continue to play a major role in Putin's governance and will continue to hold its presence in Africa. However, others say that the recent incident could demoralize members of the mercenary group and lead to a massive exodus. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Summer heat will sweep across the nation this weekend. Rain has finally tapered off, and a high-pressure system will be dominant over the weekend. Daytime highs will be hovering around 30 to 31 degrees Celsius, and due to high moisture levels in the air, temperatures will feel a couple degrees higher than the actual readings. For parts of the south, brief showers are also expected for Sunday. Under blazing sunshine, the entire nation will see strong UV rays. Overexposure to the sun's UV radiation can lead to major skin aggravation. Make sure to stay indoors, and if you have to head outside, make sure to wear plenty of sunblock. Some regions may see wide temperature gaps with morning temperatures breezier than usual. So we'll be starting off at 22 degrees. And sunny skies will dominate nationwide. Seoul and Chuncheon will be peaking at 30, Daejeon 31, Daegu and Gyeongju will be topping out at 32 degrees. On Sunday, rain will start from the south and showers will spread nationwide by next week. Have a great weekend, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this Friday night newscast. Thank you for watching. Hope everyone has a good weekend and a good night.